You're listening to the Yoga Medicine Podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Land. This podcast brings you information and resources to enhance the therapeutic effects of your practice based on a deeper understanding of anatomy, physiology, and the integration of modern science and research with traditional practices and experiences. Join me and my co-hosts Tiffany Cruikshank and Katya Bach as we dive into all things yoga, research, and wellness.
The content of this podcast is not medical advice and is not meant to replace medical care. Please consult your healthcare provider to determine what is best for your unique healthcare needs.
Hi, Steph. Welcome to the Yoga Medicine Podcast, and thank you for making time to talk to us today.
Thank you for having me.
We're so polite, aren't we?
I'm so Canadian.
Well, maybe we start by talking about your studio, Kali Collective, because I've been to a lot of yoga studios around the world, and yours is pretty unique. Most of them go for pretty neutral, light, bright, warm, cozy, maybe some references to nature, but yours is a little bit different, and you've named it after the Hindu goddess of war and anger, time, change, creation, destruction, power. So not neutral, not light, bright, not not any of those things. So let's talk first about Kali and probably repeatedly all the way through the conversation about her.
Yeah, gosh. Well, to understand, thank you for saying that about my studio, because that's like the last thing I want is a studio that looks like other studios, that is white and bright, and that's just not my thing at all. But to understand my studio, I'll need to explain Kali a little bit, if that's okay.
Yes.
And then that'll
there.
help inform the studio. Yeah. Okay. So you are right. Everything that you said about Kali, she is the goddess of all those things. The best way for me to explain Kali is that she's a symbol for the dark feminine. So what is the dark feminine? The dark feminine, well, all things have a light and a dark to it. And I don't mean a good or bad or right or wrong. I just mean a light and a shadow side. And so she represents, it's like two sides of the same coin, right? So there's like the light side of the feminine, and she represents the dark. So if we think about the feminine, one of the symbols that often comes up immediately in the collective unconscious is mother. So if I say to you, Rachel, if you think of mother, maybe not your own mother, but just mother in general, what sort of qualities do you think of?
Yeah, warm, nurturing, caring. But then I think a little bit more and I go, discipline, there's more to it. But the immediate thought is nurturing, caring, loving, giving.
Yes. Compassionate, kind, soft, tender, all those things, right? Well, that's one spectrum of the feminine. That's one side of the feminine. But there's also a totally different side, another spectrum to the feminine. And that is, maybe some people have experienced this with their own mother, but there's a side of mother that is terrifying, that is tough, that is hard, that is scary. So what Kali symbolizes is the part of the feminine. And by the way, when I say feminine, I'm not referring to any gender or sex. It's just the qualities that are inside of all of us, regardless of what body you're in. So the dark feminine really is the part that society has fragmented off and cut off and suppresses, because it is the part of us that is the untamed, the wild, the mysterious, the part of us that isn't nice and polite and perfect hair and
Controlled.
Perfect makeup, sweet, always nice, doesn't speak up. The dark feminine is the side that we have started to call, the psycho word I won't say, or she's crazy, that's the dark feminine, or the witches that got burned, that's the dark feminine that we have really, really repressed as a society. One of the symbols that I think might be helpful to explain Kali as well is the symbol of the snake. The snake is another example of the dark feminine. So if you think of a snake, well, even just by saying the name, I'm sure there's people out there who heard snake and they're like, ooh,
Well,
so
I
it's
grew up
that,
in Australia, so yeah, we're
right?
good with
Okay.
snakes.
Right. But you would know better than a lot of people how snakes be that terrifying, like, you don't mess with snakes. And yet, they kind of want to do their own thing. If you
Hmm.
think about how they move with this, it's almost like a sexiness. There's like a
Hmm.
slinkiness to snakes. But if you visualize snake, they might be doing that with one part of their body, but the other part of the body is up a tree, or it's completely still, or it's like defying gravity. And so they're both
Mm.
that beautiful sexiness, for lack of a better word. And they're also that creature that they'll leave you alone. They don't really want to
Hmm.
mess with you, but if you mess with them, they will strike. They will let it be known, don't mess with me. And that's the part that we as a society have. That's what we call the crazy ex-girlfriend, or the
Hmm.
psycho, or the
Hmm.
so
Hysterical,
it yeah, 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 yeah,
emotional.
yeah.
Hmm.
Yes, too emotional. Yeah. It's, again, another symbol is witches. It's the witches that got burned for being so powerful and being
Hmm.
so wise and practicing their medicine. It's the part that we fragmented off. So anyways, that's what Callie represents. She's the mysterious. She's the unknown. She's that territory of, like, the untamed, the wildness. If you look at an image of Callie, all of her images are that way. Her hair is everywhere. She's got blood coming out of her mouth. There's nothing sweet,
Hmm.
tender, soft, kind, controlled about
I
Callie.
do
And
remember
so,
coming into the studio and seeing an image of her holding a handful of severed heads, and
yeah.
thinking, oh, I can be myself in this studio. I don't need to edit myself here. I don't need to be all love and light. I think they can
Mhm.
whatever I say, they can probably handle here.
Yes, and I love that you felt that way. And so she used to be in the old studio that you were in. That we had that image of her at the altar, and now it's at the front door. So you open the front door, and boom, that image is right there. And that's very intentional, because I wanted it to be, you either walk in, it's like a snake. You either walk in and you love it and you're curious and you're like,
Mm,
okay, what's going on here? There's a yoga studio, everything is black. There's this really terrifying image. So you either are curious about it, or you're
mm.
like, nope, this isn't for me. So
Yeah,
I like that right from the get go. You walk in, this is either your place or
or
it's
it's not.
not.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, and it
Hmm.
obviously, from hearing you talk already, goes a hell of a lot deeper for you than just a branding concept. Oh, this will look cool. Oh, this is a great way to express what's important to me. You have a real relationship with Kali, it sounds, in
Mm.
in terms of you feel her editing your actions and kind of judging the way that you run the studio constantly.
Oh yes. Oh yeah. Yeah. And I'm glad that that's coming across, because it's really important for me whenever working with anything really in existence, but especially, the gods and goddesses
Mm,
and the tradition of yoga. For me, it really is about relationship. It's not just about taking. It would never be just a branding concept for me, because for me that would feel like I'm just taking her
mhm,
imagery, her name, what she means, and just like trying to sell from it. And that's not what it is at all. Callie, for me, is my guiding vision. She's how the studio came about to be. It's the way that it looks is because of, the guidance that I get from Callie. When I do things, wrong or not in alignment with the studio, she will let me know.
mhm,
But it wasn't always that way. The first couple years, it was more of I was definitely just, I didn't have a deep relationship with her at all. And the studio was white walls, white curtains. It was very, your typical yoga studio, no offense, but it was. And she made me pay for that. She gave me like 2 years, and then she's like, you're gonna use my name, you're gonna use my image, you gotta pay up. And so I went through the ringer with her for a couple years there to get to where I am now, which I'm really grateful for.
Do you see that you must see that happening a lot in the yoga world of people being willing to, she covers her face for people not watching, people being willing to, I mean, there have been a lot of conversations about cultural appropriation lately, and I'm still at the very, very beginnings of just figuring out what that means to me and where I'm stepping wrong. But you must see a lot of that given how much it's informing your own actions, and you're somebody who has a lot more background knowledge of the traditions of yoga than
Mhm.
most of us do.
Mhm. Yeah, my thoughts on this are, first and foremost, no one owns anything. No one owns the wisdom of yoga. No one owns the wisdom of the gods and goddesses. So for me, it just comes down to the level of sincerity towards the practice and towards
Mm.
the energy currents of the gods and goddesses, and are they actually being respected? I see all the time, people who have tattoos of Kali. I remember this one time, oh my gosh, I went on a date with someone and it did not last long. He had a very fierce image of Kali on his arm. And so, of course, I was like, oh my
Oh my
God, like thinking
God,
this man,
we're
yeah,
soulmates.
this guy, totally. I was like, he must be in deep relationship with Kali to have a massive tattoo on his body. And I asked him, "Oh my God, you got a tattoo of Kelly. How come? Like, what inspired that?" And he said, "I just think it looks really fierce." And I was like, "Is that it?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Okay."
Check, please.
And it can exactly. And so and my relationship with Kelly started off in a really superficial way because it had to. I couldn't have gone in
Yeah,
deep
you probably didn't
with
know that it
Kelly.
was superficial at the time. You probably felt like,
No,
yeah, that's
no,
the trouble, isn't it? As
no.
our understanding
Yes,
changes, our reality
yes.
changes. Yeah.
Yes, and that's the thing, and that's why even though I really wanna be annoyed at people who get tattoos of gods and goddesses without any relationship or understanding, I know that it'll come for them, but I also, it's like, "Okay, yeah, I probably was there once too." Like,
Mm.
we have to go through these things to learn. But, yeah, I think having a relationship with gods and goddesses is, for me, it was really life-changing and will
Mm.
continue to be for sure. My relationship with Callie, so I wouldn't say to anyone to not go for it, but if they feel called. But again, it's all about the reciprocity in the relationship. For
Mm.
me, I've learned so much from Callie, but I feel like I'm continually giving back to Callie, and whether it's through my morning prayers or just, I know it sounds silly, but I'll just sit, if we're going to host an event or something at Cali, I'm like, no, I'm not sure, I'll just sit and I'll be, Cali,
What do you think?
what do you think
How are we
about this?
feeling
Yeah,
about
and then I'll
this?
just, yeah, and I'll feel it in my body, or there'll be lots of hiccups and I'm like, no,
Mhm.
this isn't meant to be, or it'll
Mhm.
just feel like a yes and it's like, okay. So I feel like there's reciprocity there with the relationship, and I just think that's how all relationships should be, really, whether that's with anything and
Yeah.
any being.
I agree. I mean, some of the
Mhm.
themes that come up with her that don't come up in your standard Western yoga studio are some of these really uncomfortable things like destruction, death, and rage and grief. And they're really unpleasant things to feel and deal with. I think it's natural for us to want to kind of move around them, move away from them. Why is it so important for you that we make space to have relationships with that kind of darker, more unpleasant, more uncomfortable side of life and of
Mhm.
ourselves?
Well, this might kind of circle back to why I named my studio Cali, sorry, and I'm so inspired by that energy. When I first started yoga, like many people, I was not in a good place. I was lost, I was confused. I was young, I was about 18, so I was just, I wasn't happy. I didn't understand what that meant, what that looked
Mm.
like. I didn't understand, all those things, get spiraling and not happy at all. And that's when yoga kind of came into my life. And it's funny because in hindsight, I don't know what kept calling me back. It was something bigger than me kept calling me back to the mat because my experience was not pretty. It wasn't pleasant. It was very uncomfortable being on the
Mm.
mat, being in those silent moments with my own head was awful. And and I would walk away from my practices, yeah, feeling better or like feeling more open and whatnot. But yoga, if you're practicing it with in a really honest and vulnerable way, it exposes things to you over and over and over again. So I was noticing that, like, where is this sadness coming from? Where is this anger coming from? Why am I feeling so much intensity just from stretching? That's what I thought it was at the time. And so for me, yoga was very confronting. It was very uncomfortable, and it was exposing all these cracks within myself. And yet, what I was experiencing internally was not at all reflected externally in the yoga community. So even the studio, so I'd be feeling heavy grief and anger surrounded in a place that was very clinical and polished and
Mm.
perfect. And looking around, and everyone, it seemed, at least for me, was slim and inexpensive Lululemon stuff, and all looked the same, and they could do this and I couldn't do
Mm.
that, and blah blah blah. And then just looking at the wider community when Instagram hit, what I was seeing, because I started yoga before Instagram, and I'm sure you did too, and it was kind of different, right? Because then Instagram hit, and you see this other layer of uh, how yoga was being perceived. And so
Mm.
what I was seeing again was like perfection. It was slim bodies, flexible bodies, white bodies, middle class bodies, all wearing the same thing, all in these perfect positions. And even when the people I would follow and whatnot were showing their vulnerable side, it was still really polished and
Mm.
perfected and and contrived. It was like it was acted, and it didn't feel sincere. And so anyways, what I was seeing, it was like what I was experiencing was not matching what I thought the yoga community was. And I
Mhm.
felt very much like it was an interesting feeling, because I very much felt like I didn't belong in that community. And it was complex feeling like I don't belong in something I don't even want to be a part of. I don't want to even be a part of that. And so I always felt this weirdness with how the yoga community was. And I think that's how my studio kind of came about, was because I wanted to uh, show something or have an environment or a space that actually honored all that, the grief that we feel, the sadness that
Mm.
we feel, the anger, the messiness, the discomfort.
Mm.
And so, why that's important to me is because I know what it's like. I lived a lot of my life pretending like that darkness wasn't there, not even aware that I was pretending the darkness wasn't there. It was just
Mhm.
so suppressed that I didn't even know there was darkness there. I didn't know that there was unconsciousness or that there was pain. It was so, so, so suppressed. And the more that I woke up to life through this practice, the more I tended to the darkness in a way that wasn't bypassing, it wasn't gaslighting myself. It was being really honest of like, Steph, you need to look at this anger. You need to look at this grief, and it might take you 10 years, and it might take you, back on your knees in tears again, going over it again and again until it's actually tended through and processed and digested. And once I could actually do that and tend to my shadow side and the dark side, that's when I really woke up to life, because there was so much of me that was just suppressed. And to
Mhm.
bring it back to Cali, so much of myself that was suppressed was that dark side, was the Cali side. It was like I felt like I had no agency, no power. I felt like my wildness, which for me, it's owning my skin in growing up in a really white community. It's not trying to hide that, not trying to hide my body, not trying to straighten my really curly hair. Or cover up my skin with all this makeup. It was like really owning that I can be my wild self. I can be
Mm.
my most authentic self, and I still belong in this world, and I'm still accepted in this world. But until I actually tended to those fragmented pieces, I was just living half a life. I wasn't even living half a life. I was just living a sad kind of life, thinking I was some version of happy. So that's why it's important to me. And I know a lot of people, I understand that it's hard to sit with your anger. It's hard to sit with your grief. But I mean, it's the only way to really wake up to life is to sit with all parts of yourself, the whole pieces, all the pieces of yourself.
Mm.
And that's why I am as happy and as inspired and passionate as I am today with my life, is because I am, and it's continual, but I am always allowing myself to be seen by myself and
Mm.
by the world as
Full
well.
color. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think for me, naming the darker emotions, putting words around what I'm terrified of or what I'm raging about, it actually takes some of their power away. Not in the sense of they stop being powerful emotions, but they stop controlling me like puppet strings. I can name them, I can look at them, I can see them, I can take the
Mhm.
the importance out of them, but they're not governing my unconscious decision making anymore. So for me, that's the side
Yeah.
of that sort of inquiry that's really important. Is it's governing my actions
Mhm.
one way or another. So I may as well sit down, look you in the eye, put words
Yeah.
around you, call you what you are, and then maybe we can move forward productively, to take the lessons and
Yeah.
and take some appropriate action, as opposed to just pushing it aside until 2 o'clock in the morning when I wake up and there's nowhere for me to go.
100%. I
Yeah.
mean, these things come out one way or another, and something that is so important to me is that I don't want to repeat cycles of pain in my family. I don't want to, if I have children one day, I don't want to be passing along all these unconscious
Yeah.
things or getting angry at them because it's just projection, or
Mhm.
I want to just keep waking up to my life so that I can pass that on to others in some way. Yeah.
Mm. I mean, I do think this side of things is so important to discuss. The kind of modern yoga world is very sanitized, isn't it? It's very kind of clean
Mhm,
and white and pure and light, and to me, there's a toxicity in that. It's so sterile
mhm,
that there's no space
mhm,
for life or color or decay or the full life cycle to be expressed. Uh, and anger, grief, destruction, death, all of these things are not only inevitable, they're really powerful. They're just as powerful as hope and faith and, compassion and love, just as powerful. Um,
mhm,
but I know something that you talk about with Carly is that it's not just about the darkness. It's not just about anger and grief. It's about embracing the whole in all of its kind of messiness and
mhm,
complexity. So, is there anything along
mhm.
those lines that you want to talk about that isn't just destruction and chaos, but
Yeah,
is
let's
the
lighten
seeds
up
of
the
creation
conversation.
too? Well, not necessarily, but in honor of her being not just about darkness, but about
Yeah,
complex wholes, let's look at that side.
yeah. Totally, and thanks for bringing that up because she's also named the Great Mother, and so yes, she is about death, but she's also about birth. So
Mm.
one of the greatest
Like
examples I
the
can give
messiest process of
for
all, from what I hear from mothers, birth itself sounds
yeah, yeah,
pretty
yeah, yeah,
messy and
yeah. So I was just about
chaotic.
to say the best way to explain Callie in this life and death life and birth relationship is actual childbirth. And I've not
Mm,
experienced this, but I'm sure from what I've heard, there's an intensity to it. There's almost
mhm,
like, I want to use the word violence to it.
mhm,
You think about the blood and and pain, and so there is, and it's that moment. So she's not really about the unfolding of life. She's about the moment of death and then birth. That's her territory.
mhm.
So she really is about, in that moment of birth. I mean, from what I've heard from childbirth, there's nothing, it's beautiful, yes, it's amazing, yes, but there's
It
nothing
ain't tidy.
easy.
Yeah,
Nope. There's nothing clean and there's nothing
yeah,
easy about it.
yeah.
It's really difficult. And so if we use that metaphor, it's the same with birthing anything into our lives that's worth anything, right? There's
Mhm,
a scariness to it, there's a vulnerability to it. And so she really is about both. She's the darkness, she's the death, and she is that moment of birth and creation. So she really is a powerful um, energy to call on. But remember, the birth doesn't come without the death. So if you want the birth, you can't just call on her and say, "Oh, I want this and that, whatever."
Yeah.
Great, but there has to be a death as well somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, so she really is both sides of that coin, the light and the dark, the birth and the death. And
Yeah.
something that I've done in my studio, the new studio, not the one that you've been to, but when you go through the studio, I don't know how many people actually pick up on this. I think hopefully people do, at least subconsciously, but it is very intentional that when you walk into the studio, the first two rooms, I want it to be like you're going on a journey from entry to exit, you're on a journey. And so you walk in and it's very dark. The walls are pretty much black. There's barely any lights. It's candle lit, big terrifying image of Callie. You go into the reception, it's still dark, there's no lights really. It's very, very, I mean, you can still see what you're doing, it's safe, but and then when you walk into the studio, I'm very lucky, I've got a beautiful studio with tons of windows. So then you walk into the studio and it's pretty bright. It's still got its dark elements. There's still skulls and pictures of snakes and stuff everywhere. But we've got like pink curtains to symbolize mother, and the floors are like a nice light white, and there's tons of light. And then to leave, you have to go back into the darkness again. So it kind
Mm-hmm.
of is, symbolic of our lives, and that's just with everything. I mean, with every breath, with every inhale, it's like life, and every exhale,
Mm-hmm.
there's that symbol of death. With every day there's the light, and then there's the
Mm-hmm.
nighttime. And so yeah, she's very much about both, because
Mm.
they're
They're
not
not separate.
exclusive.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah,
no.
we're not great at holding space for duality in our minds. I think we're well, maybe I'm just speaking for myself here, but the tendency always is it's this or it's this
Mm,
or that. It's
mhm.
very difficult to make space for things to be yes and can't have one without the
Yes,
other, inextricably
yes,
linked. Mm. So
yes.
how do you make space for that, for exploring that kind of complexity? Let's start with you personally first. In your own practice, what are some of the sort of practical ways that you make space? You mentioned before about thinking through a decision or a plan or an idea and kind of asking that question either internally or out loud and kind of waiting to see what answers come up. Let's talk a little
Mhm.
more about how you make space for that complexity yourself.
It's not, there's nothing, I don't have a pretty tidy process to it. It's very intuitive and it
Perfect.
changes.
Very
Exactly,
apt. Yeah.
exactly. Could you
At
imagine?
6
Sounds like
a.m.,
life.
I
A
do
perfect
this. And then
solution. Yeah, exactly.
it's these three steps. It's just this simple. Let me talk you
Exactly.
through them.
Not at all, not at all. It starts with, I know this sounds so like, oh, cliche, but it just starts with showing up
Yeah.
in a really vulnerable way. Showing up to all my decisions, all my words, like paying attention to what I'm
Mm,
saying, what am I feeling? What is going on in the world around me that's being reflected back at me? How are my relationships? So I'm a very internal, introspective person. So I like to spend a lot of time on my own. And I think that is really helpful for me. Maybe I spend too much time on my own and too much time in my head, but it gives me the opportunity to really sit with things. I'm really quite
mm,
slow with things. I can be spontaneous and whatnot, but with decisions, especially big decisions, I'm really slow. I'll take my
mm,
time and I might sit on something for a really long time and feel into my body, like something that might seem really benign or small to someone else, like, should we host this person at the studio? Should I go out with this person for dinner or do this with friends, whatever? I'll actually like sit with that. Okay, how does that feel? How does it feel in your gut? How does it feel in
mhm.
your heart? How does your body respond when you think going out on Friday night with a bunch of people you don't really like? No, that doesn't feel good in my gut. So I'll do the
You're
Callie
describing
thing and
my
I'll
literal worst nightmare. Maybe if there were kids too,
totally
that would be my absolute worst nightmare. But yeah, superficial
dinner
social
party with,
situations
yeah,
at
yeah,
night,
yeah, yeah.
out. Ugh. Terrible.
No. So the Cali way of doing things would be, what we might be tempted to do is just go out, be nice, just go out, it'll be fun, whatever. But, I'll have to sit with that for a little bit and be like, how can I voice this in a way that's kind and honest and actually say the truth, which is, I don't like you guys. Just kidding. I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that. But to say, you know what, for this Friday evening, it's really important for me to be on my own. So thank you for the invite, and I won't be coming. So it's
Mhm.
something, again, it's something that someone might think is really small, but for me, I really sit on it and chew
Mm.
it, and I'm like, okay, how can this be really authentic to me and really honest? And don't get me wrong, I do a lot of things unconsciously as well, but I try to just stay conscious in my moments, and that includes especially includes my moments on the mat, and being really honest with myself of, hey, this isn't feeling so good today, or
Mm.
hey, you can challenge yourself a bit here,
Yeah.
Steph. Like, go for it. Why are you holding back? And
Mm.
having that dialogue in my brain, and just feeling into it. One of the things that I've really had to learn, with the help of Callie, thank goodness, is really tuning into my body again. I think for so many years I was truly like just disembodied, totally not feeling, like just living from my neck up. And
Mhm.
so it was learning to feel the answers and feeling the wisdom in my own body, and learning what is a yes, what is a no, what is a that doesn't feel so good. All those things that
Yes.
we learn when we do practice. Yeah.
100%. This is something I'm
Yeah.
so glad that you brought up, because when I was a kid, I was that living from the neck up. I was just always in
Mhm.
dreamland in my head, telling stories and following little narratives and, playing mysterious little games. And I was completely unaware of my body. And it was introduction to asana practice that allowed me to connect with my body. And whenever people kind of put down asana as being not important and lesser than, and not real yoga, I'm like, but you've got to start there. You've got to start with
Mhm.
an experience of actually being in and being with your body and noticing those
Yeah.
reactions. What does a yes feel like? What does a no feel like? What does joy feel like? What does grief feel like? What does boredom feel like?
Mhm.
Before you can do any of the other stuff, you've got to have that. And you
Completely.
can't assume that everybody has that. Yeah, I'm really glad you brought
Completely
that
agree.
up.
Yeah, completely agree. I think for some reason, I don't understand why, but I feel like the body gets really denigrated. It
Mm,
doesn't get the respect that or it's treated as if it's separate from, it's like, we say
yeah,
body and mind, but they're reflections of each other.
body
They're
mind.
one and the same thing. Yeah, body mind.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
I think it's the pendulum swing of the body gets so exalted as, if you look beautiful, therefore you're a good person, and if you look healthy, therefore you are healthy. And I think the pendulum swing is the body is nothing, the body is unimportant. It's all about the mind and spiritual awakening, and the truth, like most stuff, is in the middle, isn't it? It's in the mixture of those two. There's elements of some that's
Mhm.
true and elements of some of those ideas that are not true. But I think that's what it is. It's the reaction to the body being so exalted in social media and media in general, actually.
And especially in the yoga community, right?
Yeah.
Because the image of asana has become really, you know, contortionist, gymnast sort of thing. In a lot of ways, and it's changing for sure. It really is.
Mm,
But I think you're right. Like the pendulum has kind of gone the other way and is starting to prioritize, the other practices. But there's no hierarchy with these things. It's all, it
yeah.
really is all.
You need to do what you need to do, and you can't, I
Mhm.
think, do a lot of the other stuff until you actually have that experience of viscerally living inside your own skin, which a lot of us, I think, don't even realize that we don't have. We're so used to ignoring signals from the body that
Mhm.
sometimes they get quieter and quieter and quieter until we can't hear them at all. Yeah.
Mhm, mhm. Or until they have to make themselves known,
Yes,
and then we get an
exactly.
injury.
Yeah.
Then we get, like, I've been through that before with an injury, and then I'm like, "Ah, stupid body failing me again."
Yes. Yes,
Totally
exactly.
disrespectful.
As opposed
Mhm.
to, I sent you all the early signals, you ignored them
Yes.
completely until we had to hit breakdown. Yeah,
Mhm.
100%. So I love that
Mhm.
that even your own practice has that element of messiness to it. It's not tidy, it's not quick. There aren't three easy steps. It requires
Mhm.
you to show up and be honest and listen and accept duality in your own body and in your own mind and your own emotions. What about in the
Mhm.
studio? How do you make space to explore complexity and uncomfortable things in the studio? We've talked a little about
Boy.
decor
Yeah,
and the journey
and I
that you
think
take people on.
yeah, and I think I think environment is more important than we maybe give it credit for, because I think
Mm,
whether we're consciously taking things in or not, there's a certain, like what you said of when you came to the studio and you saw the image of Callie and you're like, "Oh, I could totally be myself here," right?
yeah.
Like, I think when you look on the walls and you see images of snakes and skulls and, the image of Callie and it's quite dark and whatnot, uh, you you I hope that there's just an instant sort of, again, either people are like uncomfortable with it, but I don't think that they'll make it that far because I'm really intentional with our website and our Instagram and all that sort of thing.
Mhm.
So I don't think someone would make it as far as getting into the studio and be like repulsed by what we're up to. Most people who make it in the studio have a good idea of
They
what
know
we're
what
up
they're
to.
gonna get. Yeah.
Um, yeah, and so I think that, well, and on that note, I also think because I'm really intentional with who the studio will attract,
Mm,
I think a lot of people see themselves or feel like they belong with when they see the other students that are there.
mhm.
So, we've got very I wish we could just get like like a school photo of the class and you'll see all the misfits of Glasgow. We've got lots of goths and that sort of thing. So there's that kind of, you walk in and it just feels, I know it's different for me, but it just feels like safe. And I'm not saying that a studio that doesn't have goths feels unsafe, but there's something about the environment and the people that come there that there's just it's just chill. It's just
Yeah,
really chill. We don't take anything too seriously. There's
yeah.
depth for sure. We're not superficial. Um, but there's like, it's chill. We swear a lot. All of us have potty mouth, and I'm not saying that that's a great thing, but we do. And it's just got this really relaxed kind of like
Yeah.
vibe to it. But of
The
course
feeling
it
that you're
comes
putting
through
out
in the
is you can be
teaching.
yourself here. You don't need to
100%.
sanitize yourself to be part of this community. You can show up in all
Hmm.
your messiness and function and dysfunction and tidiness and untidiness, and you'll be fine here.
Exactly. And then of course the teaching team, I'm very picky and very intentional with the team. And I'm so lucky, so many of them have been with me for a year, almost from the start.
That's
And so we've
awesome.
grown. It's so cool. And we've grown together. And again, not just anyone will be called to the Cali Collective. So if you're called to
Mm,
the Cali Collective, there's something there, there's some grit there. So I'm really intentional with who teaches, and they're all such fantastic teachers that the way that they're speaking the language, the sequencing, everything comes across as being just really safe and open, and yeah, just like feel your stuff.
mm.
That's what we're about.
Mm. And I saw that you have monthly a sacred circle called Holding the Tension, which is dedicated
Mhm.
to making space for uncomfortable conversations. I think that's a
Yeah.
fascinating idea. Like you pick a
Yep.
topic that you know there's going to be some discord on and
Oh,
make a safe
I
place for
mean,
people to talk about it.
we've spoken about porn, abortions, vaccines, and not in like not we're not looking for shock value. We probably won't even post that on Instagram that that's what we're talking about. We
Mm,
just kind of go there. We just, especially during the pandemic, I feel like there's a lot of people who needed a space to talk about what they were experiencing in a way
mm.
that wasn't making them right or wrong or
Yes.
vaxxed or unvaxxed or any of that sort of thing. It was just an open, honest conversation. And I think that that's really important. And, I open up my classes with, it's called an awkward question time. So like awkward question of the week. And I'll ask something really awkward, like, um, what is the most sadness you've ever felt in your life, or what are you most scared of in your life? And we just quickly go around person to person and they share. and if they want, of course, no one has to. And so things like that, it's just like it's not meant to be an icebreaker or anything like that. It's just like, okay,
Mm,
we all share the same fears. We've all felt that sadness. We all, and then it's like, okay, now let's practice yoga. We connect, and now let's practice yoga.
I love that.
Mhm.
That's a really interesting idea.
Go for
But
it. See how
but
people respond.
yeah, I think there is I I think people are starting to recognize that there's a lack of those sorts of spaces in the world at the moment. You're in your camp of I'm pro this and I'm anti that. And it's only really safe to talk to people who share your opinions because otherwise you'll be eviscerated, you'll be torn to shreds. And I think a lot of us are realizing that there need to be spaces where you can say what you think and say how you feel. And it's okay. There's room for debate and conversation. And I don't need to change my mind and you don't need to change your mind, but at least we can talk. So I think that's hugely important.
Hugely, hugely important. I know. I feel like over the pandemic, things got very black and white, very
Yeah.
binary,
Yeah.
and we lost a lot of nuance and complexity. So,
Yeah.
I'm not intentionally trying to like bring that back, but I think it's really important to find, you don't know what someone's been through when they show up for their 6 p.m. yoga class. We have
Yeah.
no idea what happened
Yeah.
to them that day, yesterday, what kind of day they've had at work. So it's nice to just start off like connecting, like
Mm.
really connecting. And I find the best way to do that is through a really awkward question. What makes you cry? That sort of thing. Because then you feel like, okay, I'm not alone in this.
Mm.
You feel connected to your community because yoga can be really insular. You go in, often studios are silent, right? So you go in and you're
Mhm.
not talking, you do your practice on your own mat, and then you get your stuff and you go. And so something that I'm trying to do is, get people to actually connect and talk before and after. So I spend a lot of money on like, you know, cookies and tea stuff so that they can stay after and have your Jaffa cakes and all that sort of thing. And
That's an
yeah,
interesting
that's
thing for an
important to me.
introvert to invest in. I would have thought you'd be like, "Great, class is done. I'm gonna retreat back to my safe space. Goodbye."
You know what? I only teach twice a week, so if it's
Mhm.
twice a week,
Yeah. You
I
manage your
I can
energy.
do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I love the people that come. I've said this a couple times already, but we're very intentional with the type of people that are attracted to the studio. So
Mm,
it's like we're not for the mainstream. We're not getting the people that just come and go. We're getting like the people who are like really into us, and so
mm.
they're cool. So I want to hang out with them. So it's fine, but only
I
twice a week.
No, I think this is awesome. I think you've really hit on something that I think a lot of small businesses need to hear because I think there's a real temptation to try to be as open and accessible as possible. And I'm all for accessibility, but it's like uh, we're trying so hard to speak to everyone that we don't speak
Mhm.
to anyone. We end up just creating this kind of bland, featureless exterior that doesn't really allow people to connect. Whereas you've been very deliberate
Yep.
around these are my people, these are my
Mhm.
values. It's not for everyone, and that's okay. But for the people that it speaks to, we're a very committed and close community.
And I've tried doing the, whitewash, superficial, clinical yoga studio before, and it's an uphill battle because you're competing with a lot of
Yeah.
other people doing
Yeah.
the
People
exact
with
same
deeper
thing.
pockets than
But
you're ever going to have. Yeah.
exactly,
Mhm.
exactly. So with Cali, it just doesn't feel, maybe this is me being naive, but it just doesn't feel like there's competition because the studios are so different
Mhm.
than ours. We're doing something different, similar in so many ways, of course, but it just doesn't yeah, it just doesn't feel like competition, which is a really nice way to feel.
Mm. Yes. So if you were talking to a small independent studio who were interested in what you were saying, but like, skulls aren't for us, and we're not going to have a picture of Carly at the entrance. How would you suggest they figure out what their community is and what their values are? And, how can they find their niche of their people, would you give them
Mhm.
any tips to help them find their own way that I presume will be pretty different to yours?
So, yeah, something that I ask myself all the time is this needed in the community?
Mhm.
And sometimes the answer is no. So it's
Damn it.
really about checking. Yes, totally. So it really is like I've been really tempted to open multiple studios across Scotland, and then when I really sit with that, is this needed? Usually the answer, well, so far the answer has been no,
Mm,
because it might be that there's already enough studios, and yes, we're different, but is that where I want to spend my time?
mm,
The answer has always been no. So the first thing is like, not to rain on anyone's parade, but is this actually needed in the community? To have a look around, and if you really feel like, when I opened up Cali, I really felt passionate of like, oh no, this is missing in the city,
mhm.
and this feels right to do here in Glasgow.
Yeah, and for
Uh,
people who
so
haven't been there, you likened it to Gotham City, and that is such a perfect description of
yeah,
Glasgow. It is gothic, it is dark, it is mysterious,
hmm
and kind of,
hmm
Sherlock Holmesy. There's a delightful kind of
yeah,
creepiness to Glasgow that I thought was super cool. It is the
a
perfect
delight.
place for
Yes,
your studio. It really
yeah.
is.
It Cali couldn't, and I've been tempted to open up a Cali collective in Canada, and no, it's got to be. I maybe
Mm,
do a studio called something else, but Cali,
yeah.
it's got to be in Glasgow. So yeah, so I would just check in of like, is what you're doing really innovative? Is it creative? Is it doing something new, or is it doing something that's already been done? Because if it's already been done and you just have a couple good ideas, join forces with
Mm,
something that's already existing, or partner up
collaborate.
with something that's already existing.
Mm,
Collaborate, yeah, instead
yeah,
of
that's
trying
great.
to like, do a bunch of different things, have a bunch of little studios or something. But yeah, I think the best advice I can give anyone doing a small business is to really, and this might take time, but really figure out what is authentic to you. What is sincere? Like, what does your whole heart want to do? Figure out
Mm,
what that is. What would make a yoga studio or just a yoga business, whatever? What would make that unique to you that no one else can do? Figure out what that is. Might take time, might take years, and then do that and do it through and through in every way. Your Instagram, your actual physical space, your website, everything. Make it as authentic to you and as real to you as it can be. Otherwise, you're just going to compete and drive yourself nuts.
yeah. And I think it's come through in this conversation several times how much time and energy that takes because your understanding of what those values are continues to deepen over time. The more
Mhm.
time you spend around decisions, investigating your responses and your reactions, is this the right path? Is this needed? That's not a quick and easy process. That takes not
Mhm.
just time as in for the business to develop, but time each week or each month to really investigate your decisions and to think things all the way through and to be really intentional about all that you do.
Yeah, it's a slow process. There can't be a
Mm,
rush to this sort of thing. At least for me, because my business, my work is very meaningful to me. And I think anyone who's listening, it would be for them as well.
mm,
So this isn't something that I take lightly at all. All the tiny decisions, if we need to change pricing or something, I will sit on that for months, for probably 6 months before I make a decision. Or if I,
mm,
changes on the timetable, I'll sit with that for a long time. That's not just like because I've really got to feel into it and tease out where is this coming from? Is this coming from scarcity? Is this
mhm.
coming because I'm afraid? Is this coming because I want more money? Is this like, where is this actually coming from? Tease that out first, and then make your decisions. And the thing is with Callie, she'll let me know either way because she'll kick my ass either way. So I'll get the answer sooner or later.
She sounds like quite a terrifying accountability partner. You better
Oh my
listen,
god.
because if you don't
Oh
listen, I'm
god.
going to beat your ass to the ground.
That's exactly it. Yeah, so good
Yeah.
luck to anyone who wants to work with Callie. Should change your life, but hold on tight.
It's going to be a wild ride. So the last thing that I
Exactly.
wanted to talk to you about was Yoga Medicine Online. You are our guest teacher for this month. And I'm quite excited for people and for me too to experience your practices. Is there anything that you'd like to share about the classes that you filmed for us?
Well, yeah, actually, it's really interesting. I had a interesting experience that I think will be helpful for people. So when Tiffany asked me, I nearly shat myself. I was like, "Oh my god!" So of course, my response was, "Okay, choose classes that everyone's gonna like, because you have to be liked on Yoga Medicine Online, right?" So I did, and I recorded these classes, and there was just no flow with the recording. Where there
Mm.
should have been ease, because I've done this a million times before, there was no ease. Like hiccups, just hiccups, hiccups, hiccups. And so I had to stop and be like, okay, what is going on here, Steph? And then it didn't take me long for Callie to come in and be like, what do you think you're doing? Teaching pranayama for sleep? Like, you've got one shot to be on Yoga Medicine. Like, come on, do what's totally
Who are
authentic
you
to you.
trying to
Anyone can
be?
teach. Exactly. So don't do pranayama for sleep, do pranayama for anger, do pranayama
Mm.
for grief. And so I had to completely, like last week, change pretty much everything. And so now it's more Callie focused without, I don't even actually say Callie's name once, I don't think. But it's all those themes. So one of them is about taking back, your power, any power that you feel has been lost. One of them's about your wildness, just embracing that untamed side of yourself. I've got a meditation for grief. So if you've experienced maybe someone who's passed recently, or it's just deep sadness, there's a meditation for that, and there's pranayama for when you're angry. So there'll
I
be a
think you
nice
did an
mix.
Instagram post along those lines for breathing when you want to break shit. And I was like,
That,
that's
yes,
the kind of breathing practice I can get behind. If people
thanks.
have been listening to this conversation and they're like, I want to break shit, or I feel like I want to reclaim some lost power, I want to get more wild, I'm sick of being tamed and controlled, where would
Yes.
you send them to find out more information about you and what you do?
Well, I've got a lot of Cali stuff on at Steph Wall Yoga. That's my Instagram. And if you
Mhm.
check out the Cali Collective, you'll find us easy, and we've got lots of resources there to learn more about Cali.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for
Yay.
coming on the podcast and sharing your thoughts and your experiences and your ideas. And I really appreciate you sharing the messiness of it, the upsides, the downsides, the disclaimer. Don't work with Carly if you're not ready to have some stuff messed up. I love it. Thank you
Exactly.
so much for your time today.
Oh, thank you, Rachel. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Yoga Medicine. If you liked the show, be sure to subscribe and leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you got something out of this episode, please spread the word and share it with a friend. You can find more information, articles, trainings, and classes at yogamedicine.com. Check us out on social media as Yoga Medicine, or you can email us at info@yogamedicine.com. Thank you for being part of our Yoga Medicine community.
The content of this podcast is not medical advice and is not meant to replace medical care. Please consult your healthcare provider to determine what is best for your unique healthcare needs.